You know that feeling when you wake up, you've got an extra bit of spring in your step. Perhaps you're going to go hang out with some friends, go on a trip, perhaps there's some projects you're going to finish, or perhaps your new morning routine and habits have got some good momentum and you want to keep them up. But sometimes something else gets in the way. Perhaps you look at some bad, negative news that's so prevalent. Perhaps someone cuts you off in traffic. Or perhaps you just notice a few hours later, you're doom scrolling, you feel depressed, you feel apathetic, and you're wondering what happened. But more importantly, you notice you can't quite shift out of this mood. You feel stuck, and you notice you keep losing days through being in a negative mood that feels sticky, that you can't quite move out of. If that's something that feels familiar, and if you're human, it might well feel familiar at times, we're going to explore this through this book here. The Act of Will from Roberto Assagiolis. And you might notice as you begin to move or attempt to move out of this sticky place, you might notice there's two strategies that you use, and Assagiolis warns against this. He says there's one strategy that people use, which is to use strong Victorian will, which is basically to use a inner tyrant kind of energy to try and push ourselves through this, which is just pick yourself up, push through, stop acting like a child. We've got adult things to get on with. And so that means you've got to push down and repress some of these negative feelings that you're with just to get on with your tasks. And the second approach that he warns against is to basically give yourself full reign of feeling and emotion and to not try and move out of it at all. What this looks like is, well, my morning's screwed, so I guess the rest of my day is screwed. And so what you decide to do is just start scrolling on your phone, just start binge eating, or just start insert any particular habit of soothing that you do when you're in this dark place. But he offers us an alternative. He offers us a third option, which is called the act as if technique or the act as if method. But first of all, we need to understand what is going on here. And he talks about something called psychological laws. On a very simplistic level, the way we can look at this is sensation, so what you feel in your body, tingling, tightening, vibrating, moving, hotness, coldness. Sensation leads into emotion, so hotness might lead into anger, tightness might lead into anxiety, or whatever it may be, begins to grow and build into thinking. So you begin to think anxious thoughts, you begin to worry, you begin to get concerned, you begin to catastrophize, or you get angry and it begins to color your thoughts. You begin to think about hurting people, you begin to think about people being enemies, you begin to bring up old history, and that thought begins to lead into an image. You imagine yourself acting out of that sensation, that emotion. You begin to start checking if all the doors are locked, or you begin to imagine yourself cutting someone else off in traffic or flipping them off or whatever it may be. You begin to imagine yourself doing that, which eventually grows and builds and leads into action, which begins to reinforce the whole process, and it grows and builds again. So we have to consciously engage and utilize these energies for a more intentional purpose. Otherwise, we're going to be wondering, why don't I feel like I'm in control of my life? Why do I feel like my urges or other people or whatever it is, why does it feel like they're in control? That I'm not in the driver's seat of my life. And so let's look at a quote from Assagiolis to contextualize this a little bit more. One of the mistakes that we make, which is prevalent today, is to abdicate the will. Urges, drives, and desires are allowed to happen without any regulation or consistent direction. And importantly, he says, in such a situation, the function that is strongest at the moment will capture one's attention and express itself. So again, if you don't purposefully begin to direct these energies, the strongest one will dominate. And if you're familiar with the idea of subpersonalities or internal family systems and parts within that context, whatever part, whatever subpersonality is most dominant is going to hijack your system and take you over for the day. So the warrior, the anxious one, the angry one, the crusader, whatever it is, whatever energy is most alive, will begin to direct and control your whole day until it's exerted a certain amount of libido, psychic energy, and it diminishes. And then the next one pops up and takes over. And so we don't feel in control of ourselves. And so to pull out another quote within this context, as we begin to use this process, doing so gives first of all a feeling of freedom and confirms that we are not the slaves of our ever-changing emotions, of our physiological and psychological conditions. And so as we engage in this act as if process, which I'm going to go into now, you begin to feel like you are in the driver's seat again. You have a sense of inner awareness and will where you can begin to be aware of, but also direct your inner psychology. If you imagine your libido's flowing through you like water, you can begin to decide where that water flows and nourishes, as opposed to just building a dam and cutting off the water source or allowing it to spill and flood everywhere out of control. So let's look at this method. The first step is to begin to think about a quality that you want to embody. Maybe you want to embody courage. Maybe you want to embody love, compassion, more assertiveness and drive. Begin to imagine what that's like. And importantly, begin to build the posture and energy of someone that utilizes and uses these qualities that you want to evoke. So you want to be more assertive. Draw your shoulders back. Lift your chest up. Lift your chin up. Because when we're scared, we want to protect the throat. We want to hide it. So expose that. What's it like to walk in a different way? Talk in a different way. Breathe in a different way. Slow down the breath. Talk a little bit deeper, a little bit slower, a little bit more intentional. And begin to literally act as if you were assertive or courageous. And you might notice, as you begin to do that, the emotion begins to follow. So you actually begin to feel a level of courage. You begin to feel the power of assertiveness that begins to come in. Assagiolis speaks quite clearly. He says, it's very difficult to directly go to emotion and try and cultivate and change emotion. But if we are to first embody the characteristics of how we want to be, the emotion begins to follow, which I'll bring a quote out for to prove I'm not making it up. He says, this technique consists in acting as if one already possessed a desired inner state. It is based on the fact that while the will can exercise only a limited direction of control over emotions and feelings, and often no control at all, it can act much more directly and fully on physical attitudes and external actions. If, for example, we are sad or depressed, it is difficult, if not impossible, to become cheerful or serene through a direct act of will. On the other hand, it is within our power to smooth our forehead, lift our head, smile, and speak words of harmony, optimism, confidence, and joy. He then goes on to say later in the page, the use of this technique will actually change our emotional state. And so as you do that, as you smooth your forehead, you relax, you drop your shoulders, you lift your head, you lift your chest, the emotion begins to follow. So let me give a real life example to ground this material. I was at a wedding and the best man approached me, one of them, and he said, I'm going to do a speech. I'm really nervous, I'm spiraling, and I'm starting to drink more and more. Can you help me? I said, yes. And I thought about this technique as the quickest way because I think he had like 20 minutes basically before this speech. So I said to him, what represents courage? What represents power for you? And he said, a tiger. So I was like, okay, good. What's it like? What's it feel like in your body as you imagine embodying the energy of tiger? And he said in his solar plexus, he began to feel this kind of powerful moving energy. He didn't say solar plexus, that's my words. That's where he pointed to his solar plexus. And I said, okay, I want you to really feel into this now, kind of imprint it in yourself, and then carry this posture with you And before you do your speech, really embody it. Really embody the courage, the power of the tiger. And then he came up to me afterwards and he said it worked. And so through evoking this energy, through taking on the posture of tiger, he then allowed the essence, the energy, the emotion, the courage to follow. And so begin to think about this example for yourself. Perhaps you aren't doing the best man speech at your friend's wedding, but there'll be another example in your life. You could think about all of the different domains and areas in which this technique could be helpful. You want to ask for a raise? Act as if. You want to find a new girlfriend or a new boyfriend and you want to approach someone? Act as if you have the confidence. You want to have that conversation that's usually difficult? Act as if you're the type of individual that can have that conversation. But first of all, remember, it happens on the level of body. The emotion follows. So I'd be interested to hear where you feel like this technique might be helpful, and you can just comment down below and let me know what areas of your life you feel that this would be useful for you. And I look forward to reading your comments. I'll see you in the next video.